Live, it's the Inside Scoop, Virginia. All the news Virginians want to know. Here's your host, political insider, George Burke.
Welcome to Inside Scoop, Virginia. My name is George Burke, and I have two bloggers with me today. We are going to talk about blogs. We're going to talk about politics. And we're going to see where we go from there. There's been some interesting developments on the blog as of late. And we're having technical difficulties here. I think we have it resolved. Anyway, my guests today are Kenton, who has a blog called The New Dominion Project. Kenton's a college student. But Kenton, you've been blogging since time eternal here, since you were in high school, and your blog has gotten quite a bit of notoriety over the years. You used to have a blog, I believe, called 750 Volts.
I don't know if notoriety was what I was looking for, but I'll take that.
And my other guest is Bryan Scrafford. He has been on the show before, and he is with the Left of the Hill blog, which is also a relatively new blog. You had another blog previously that had you'd gone by your name, Bryan. And I want to make one more point before I introduce him and we really start talking, and that is I think collectively the two of them together, age-wise, equal about 3/4 of my age. So we should have an interesting discussion, particularly since I'm a dead tree guy. I worked in the newspaper business for some time, and I know bloggers certainly have their own views on newspapers. So let's get right off the bat. I would ask each of you, starting with Kenton, to sort of define for our viewing audience what a blog is to you. How would you define a blog to an old codger like me, who, quite frankly, I do know what they are, but pretend I don't, and pretend our viewers don't.
Well, it gets trickier to answer that question every day. What a blog is become more and more open and loose to interpretation over the last couple of years. But right now, it's pretty much any website that is regularly updated with content by somebody through one of multiple or any content management systems. I mean, it's very open to interpretation now. So that's the textbook definition of a blog.
Bryan, what do you think?
Well, I think Kenton's right that's kind of the textbook definition of a blog. I think you further kind of get into separate types of blogs, where both Kenton and I run political blogs, and I guess from that perspective, how I define it is blog is a way for usually either a grassroots activist or some sort of political insider to kind of put out their opinions on the various political issues of the day, and what really kind of distincts it from other forms of getting out their information is you can just put it up on a website and hundreds or thousands of people can come and read it, whereas in the old days you were kind of had phone tree lines that you'd make phone calls to various groups to get out information. Now we can just put it up on a website.
Well, asking what a blog is isn't really as fruitful of a question as it seems on the surface, because it's kind of like asking what is a publication, what is a magazine. You know, you have magazines about almost anything. Likewise, you have blogs about trees, you have blogs about cats, you have blogs about politics, you have blogs about bad English. So it's more of a publication medium than a thing that can be defined.
There's, I view them, at least we'll move to the political side of them for a minute. Obviously, and we'll compare them to newspapers if we may. Newspapers have been around for hundreds and hundreds of years since the invention of the printing press. But I guess you could say blogs have been too. They just used to be printed pamphlets. Back in the early days of our country, there were pamphleteers, and dozens of them who expressed their opinions quite vociferously and shared those with their readers, whether they handed them out on a street corner, whether they, of course in the old days there was no post, so they didn't mail them. And from that derived newspapers. And in the early days of journalism, and quite frankly still in Europe and other places in the country, you have newspapers that take very rigid political postures. In Europe, you'll find some will support the conservatives, some will support the liberals, unabashedly. And that happened in the early part of our nation, and over time, those were the days of the Hearsts and the yellow journalism and the like. And in more recent years, newspapers have been viewed as being more objective. Now, I'm one who argues that reporters are subjective beings, like we all are, so nothing is fully objective. But that's how I view blogs. I view blogs for the political side. There are modern-day pamphleteers.
I would definitely agree with that. I think most bloggers like me have no pretensions of being journalists in the American sense, that journalists are unbiased observers, not necessarily in the European sense. But bloggers now are sometimes called citizen journalists, but really essentially pamphleteers who don't have to crank up the printing press every morning and have readers from not only where they can pass it out to and get the prints out to, but from anywhere in the world or anywhere in a constituency that matters to them.
They can find a blog by punching in a few keywords. Even if they don't know that your particular blog exists and yours is the New Dominion Project, if they were to punch in the name of a politician that you happen to be talking about, ultimately you would show up on their Google list.
And like pamphleteers, they're very difficult to shut down. You can't just come in and smash one printing press. More and more will pop up, and that's what countries like China and Iran are having the problem with. And it becomes a kind of mass media that's governed by the masses.
Bryan?
Well, I think probably the main difference that I see between the newspapers and the blogs is even the columnists who write opinion columns in our mainstream newspapers, they usually go through some sort of editing process. Now, granted, if a blogger was putting out facts that weren't true or this had a horrible writing style, their blog wouldn't take off. But the big thing is that I don't have an editor besides myself. Occasionally I'll bounce ideas off of other bloggers like Kenton and see if something would actually be worthy of a story, but we don't have the editors that kind of clamp down on some of our writing that we want to put up, which I think promotes more freedom of ideas, because it's truly what the average Joe on the street is thinking, and they can put out their ideas in a manner where even if you were to write a letter to the editor in a newspaper, it's not necessarily going to get published.
How many people are reading a blog on any given day? Let me ask you, how many people view your blog each day, if I can ask?
On a normal day, I usually get kind of in the range of 400 people a day. When it's closer to an election, that goes way up. Or if there's a particular story that I have broken and gets picked up by other websites and maybe even the mainstream media, it'll go up to over 1,000 a day. And I think for kind of the 400 to 500 range is where a lot of the blogs are in Virginia, where, although we do have a few that are getting about 2,000 to 3,000 a day.
How about you, Kenton?
Well, right now, New Dominion Project is a relatively new blog, so we're getting around 400, 500 unique visitors to the page each day. But the technical challenges in measuring readership include RSS feeds, which are very difficult to track. People who subscribe to our feeds that read our content but never visit our site.
So explain that to me. They come into their email account, or
well,
how do they receive these?
Blogs nowadays publish what's called an RSS feed. It's kind of like it's a syndication feed, and you have certain programs. You have a web-based service like Google Reader, which will just take the contents from the sites immediately as they are published. And so you can read my work, read my blog, without ever having to visit. And there are also blog aggregators that take your content and put snippets of it on their website so that people have everything coming in one place.
And then you link to it to go back to read the whole story.
But see, blogs are very niche operations, and so direct readership numbers aren't necessarily as important as who you're reaching and where you're reaching. And so for Virginia political blogs, the class of people that are intensely interested in state politics is actually quite small. I'd probably pin it within just probably several thousand, maybe 10, 20,000 people that would be interested in such a thing. And so if you have them all concentrated in one place, it's different than having a newspaper of general circulation with 2 million readers a day, 10,000 of which maybe are, Virginia politicos.
I assure you, the Post wishes it had 2 million readers a day. They keep, their circulation keeps declining. In fact, the circulation of virtually every newspaper in the country keeps declining. Part of it, I think, is the changing demographic right off the bat. You have the new breed of readers. I mean, my oldest son is 31 years old, and I have 2 children younger than him. One is a voracious newspaper reader. The other 2 never look at a newspaper. They get their news off the internet, even if they go to the Washington Post or whatever news site there is. And I don't think any newspapers truly developed a model yet to make money with their webpage, with their internet style news operation. I love it. It's very handy for me in my line of work because I can pull all that stuff up. And it's problematic. It's one of the things. Many newspapers, I don't want to suggest blogs are killing them. Sometimes their own websites are killing them.
I don't think it's even their own websites that are killing them. If they didn't have a website, they would probably die even faster. And so circulation numbers aren't even the most accurate numbers to determine how many absolute eyeballs are reading this newspaper's content, because the paper form is a dying format. I certainly don't read the paper form of the newspaper, and many people in my generation don't. But what we do is the aggregator is the magic bullet here. You can read multiple newspapers at once on your laptop screen without ever having to leave your desk. And so if you wanted to read, Hong Kong news, you can pull up the South China Morning Post with ease the day it is published. You can read newspapers from around the state all at once. And so the idea that you get all of your news from one central source local to you is no longer necessary, because you can get your news from anywhere and anywhere that has a click of a mouse.
We're going to be breaking in about 1 minute and 3/4 here, but let me pose a question. The South China Post, the Washington Post, the LA Times, the New York Times have vast news operations with hundreds and hundreds of reporters, with foreign correspondents in many world capitals, although the Post, the Times have both reduced the number of bureaus they have in recent years for financial purposes. They make their money by selling advertising. The thicker, people say, oh, it's a thick newspaper, there must be a lot of news. It's really a thick newspaper because there's lots of advertising. The more advertising, the bigger your news hole. The smaller, less advertising, the smaller your news hole. Classified ads were another big revenue producer for newspapers. However, Craigslist and all these other internet sources have in essence really decimated classified advertising for newspapers. So their revenue sources are drying up. If they can't provide enough eyeballs to that newsprint, that's the only thing they can prove that they're getting eyeballs on, their advertising rates drop, or advertisers are less interested in them. So when we come back after the break, I want to discuss this a little bit more, that it's great to have an aggregator, but what about when there's nothing to aggregate? And that could very well happen to us in the near future. To me, it's a scary proposition. I'm not suggesting blogs are doing it, but all these different pieces of the internet and the ability of people to use them are hurting the news business. We'll be back in 2 minutes.
She's had more than a dozen fractures. And in the next few years, she faces 2 major surgeries to strengthen her fragile bones. She's only 10 years old. Most people don't worry about fragile bones until late in life. For those with osteogenesis imperfecta, brittle bones are a concern throughout their lifetime. Find out how you can strengthen this child's future.
Diabetes is a killer. After I was diagnosed, I didn't feel sick, so I didn't listen to my doctor. Then it struck. I had a heart attack, then a stroke, and I was only 49.
Most people with diabetes also have high blood pressure and cholesterol, which can cause severe heart damage. In fact, 2 out of 3 people with diabetes die from heart disease or stroke.
Don't let diabetes destroy your life.
Call for your free diabetes survival guide. Choose to live.
Once again, George Burke with the Inside Scoop, Virginia.
Welcome back. I got a couple of bloggers on the show with me today. Kenton Ngo of the New Dominion Project and Bryan Scrafford of Left of the Hill. Bryan, I'm going to start with you since you're down the end there, and it's sometimes hard for me to get to you. You heard my discussion just before the break. Where, if newspapers continue to die on the vine, I mean, just in the last few weeks, the Rocky Mountain News closed in Denver, making Denver a one newspaper town. One newspaper towns are not good because you don't have competition, they get lazy. And we saw the same thing happen in Seattle with the Post-Intelligencer, a newspaper that's been around for, I think, about 100 and some odd years. Fold up their edition as well. They're going to stay on the web, but they've cut their reporting staff back to about 20 people, et cetera, so things have changed dramatically. We see the Post circulation continue to drop. We're seeing sections getting compressed. Outlook's been cut by a couple of pages, and they now have the book section has been eliminated. It's part of Outlook, which I hate, quite frankly. I'd rather read more opinion stuff. They've plugged the editorial page back into the front section of the Sunday section. The LA Times, there was just a big piece in the New Republic about the LA Times and what's happened to the LA paper and how many bureaus they've shuttered and the like. So the internet is taking its toll. One of the smaller newspapers I worked for early in my career, the woman who's the managing editor, I spoke to her recently, and she said I wouldn't recognize the newsroom if I went into it, that it was an empty vessel compared to what it was before, not only in terms of the number of people in there, but also in terms of the caliber of the people, that they're newer, less experienced, et cetera, and there's something to experience when you're a newspaper reporter. We're seeing the same thing happen at the TV stations even, and that's a totally different medium. But I walk into some of these television stations, or if I'm going into a TV station with Congressman Connolly, and the newsrooms are now half empty. It's startling, and quite frankly, from my perspective, it's scary. Will blogs be able to fill that gap, or what vehicle on the internet will fill that gap? No. Let's face it, you know, the Huffington Post has a certain political leaning. Even in Virginia, whatever the blog you look at, you can pretty much tell within a minute or two where their politics are. So do you have to figure out where they are and then aggregate a bunch of these and expect to get the same caliber of news you get out of the Post, the Times, or even out of a smaller newspaper that covers its community sort of like a blanket?
Now, I'm actually friends with a couple of the reporters from the local papers, like the Center View and the Fairfax Times and stuff like that. And this is something that always comes up whenever I'm interacting with them. And I don't think that the blogosphere can replace the mainstream newspaper, primarily because most bloggers have other jobs and they make most of their living through other means. So we're not going to have the time to devote to necessarily going and doing all the investigative research that might go into a story behind the school board. Now, I go to a lot of the school board meetings and a lot of the county board of supervisors meetings, but I'm not necessarily, when an issue comes up, I'm not necessarily going to know the backstory. And if I don't know the backstory, I might have just missed a huge important thing that we need to get out to the public. Whereas with the daily beat reporters who are covering like the Fairfax County School Board would know that backstory. So I'm extremely worried about the fact that these stories aren't going to be able to get out there. And I think that with the blogs, we can help to amplify those stories, but we're not going to be able to actually replace the research that a lot of the reporters do, because even full-time bloggers, a lot of times are working on their own and are not able to go to all the various stories, and they're going to have to leave some stories on the blog room floor. So I think we're not going to be able to replace the newspapers. And for me, I think the blogosphere actually thrives when the mainstream media is also thriving, because we can add color to stories that the mainstream media is reporting on, but we can also pick up other stories that aren't being covered in the paper. So it's a good balance where I think we can be seen in some settings on equal footing as the papers, and that allows better stories and more information to get out to the public. If we're all suffering and trying to just straggle to get the real basic stories, then that doesn't help anybody.
Well, again, we're asking the wrong question here, which is, oh no, look at paper circulation. It's falling. What do we do? This is not the problem. It's, funny, George, you should mention the Outlook section is one of the casualties of this. If there's anything that the blogs are good at, it's what the Outlook section does. It's pure opinion. And so what we're going to see in these newsrooms is that newsrooms will stop doing the functions that blogs do better. And that is hyperlocal coverage, that is opinion coverage, and things like the Outlook section that can easily be done on the internet. And we're going to be moving away from general circulation, behemoths that cover like a blanket the whole city and do everything all at once, into splintering into smaller publications that have a hyper laser-like focus on the beats that they cover. And so what will end up happening is that, for instance, advertisers will see, instead of advertising to newspaper to everybody, they can see a targeted niche readership. And so the Outlook section is the death of the Outlook section isn't something that I weep about.
But what about the overall coverage? What about the quality? And before I go any further on the quality, I want to note that I have seen some stuff that both of you have done, but I'm going to highlight a few of the things you've done, because you play with statistics a lot. You do a lot of these maps. I saw something on your blog when I was looking at it earlier today, showing how the state delegate districts had morphed over the years when redistricting took place, and how it changed from red to blue, and then how it became redder again after redistricting. And I've seen some of the numbers crunching that you had done, which I think have been very impressive. And that is statistical stuff that, quite frankly, even newspapers don't do. So I give you some kudos on that. But will someone deal with all these little niches? Will advertisers deal with all these little niches? 500, 1,000 people are not enough to excite an advertiser. Neither of you guys can tell me you're making a living with the little bit of advertising you have on your blogs. And even some of the bigger blogs, at least within this state and elsewhere, have been unsuccessful in terms of being financially viable. And the newspapers are finding that their websites are not necessarily financially viable. So, and I assure you, in the newspaper business, it really isn't about the news, it's about the advertising. It is a business. And for many, many years, shareholders were used to reaping huge returns from newsprint, just as they were from television stations. And when those returns start dropping, they're not into holding their line. They're into cutting positions, cutting editorial positions to keep the bottom line as high as they can, because they are a business. So how do these blogs become financially viable?
Who said they had to become financially viable? This blogs versus newspapers debate is like two ships in fog firing at each other, passing by without seeing each other. There's no real need for people to think of this as the choice in the future is between blogs or newspapers. Nobody in the blogosphere has any pretension of being a newspaper. Newspapers don't have pretensions of being bloggers. They dabble, and we'll see an inevitable merging of formats in the future. But these forms will coexist. And when the newspaper was invented, nobody, I'm sure that people were slightly concerned that the town crier industry was going downhill, but nobody said that information would stop coming.
It did kill the town crier.
It did kill the town crier.
Now they kill trees instead.
Now they kill trees instead. But see, another thing is that these local papers might actually have an opening in the fall of the great metropolitan newspaper, because you live in, let's say I live in Springfield. Let's say something happens in Springfield regarding a school. Would I be more likely to read it from, say, the Springfield Connection or from the Washington Post? It's more likely to be in the Connection. And so thanks to the computer and thanks to the internet, I can, instead of running out every Thursday and getting the paper copy, I can just get it on my computer instantly. And so this might be very good for certain publications. This isn't bad for the industry. This is good for certain publications that can adapt, and this is bad for publications that can't. And that's capitalism.
How do they adapt? How does a publication, let's say the Springfield Connection, which has X number of reporters, again, makes its money from the print edition, because that's where the advertisements are sold. They run advertisements on the Connection, on their website, but they make their money from the print advertising. Where does their revenue come from to keep this alive if ultimately their Dead Tree edition dies?
Well, the Dead Tree edition will stay as long as people are willing to pay for the advertising. It's mainly a profitable shell right now. There's no question. People would rather get their news from the online edition because it happens faster. When you open up the morning paper, you're reading yesterday morning's news.
Correct.
So the news will be coming from the internet. And how you monetize that is, well, we'll find out. But when we bemoan the fact that newspapers are dying, we stick our heads in our sands and pretend that it's impossible. But they will find a way.
We'll be back and see whether we can drill a little deeper and find a way. I mean, right now we're talking about they will. I'm not so sure. Kenton, you're more sure than I am, so we shall see. So stay with us. Please hang out. We'll be back in 2 minutes with Bryan Scrafford and Kenton Engo.
I need a job.
Necesito trabajo. I would like to speak English better. Me gustaría hablar inglés mejor.
I want to be a U.S. citizen.
Quisiera ser ciudadano de los Estados Unidos.
For over 35 years,
por más de 35 años,
the Hispanic Committee of Virginia has been serving our community.
El Comité Hispano de Virginia ha estado sirviendo a nuestra comunidad.
Job training and placement,
capacitación, ayuda para conseguir trabajo,
education for children and adults,
educación para niños y adultos,
immigration, naturalization, and medical referrals,
ayuda para los procesos de inmigración y naturalización y orientación sobre médicos
are a small part of what we do.
Son solo una pequeña parte de lo que hacemos.
For help, information, or to volunteer,
para ayuda, información o para ofrecerse como voluntario,
contact the Hispanic Committee of Virginia.
Comuníquese con el Comité Hispano de Virginia,
helping everyone participate more fully in American society.
Ayudando a todos a participar plenamente en la sociedad norteamericana.
Hey, Lena, where's yours?
Would you notice if you were missing half your kidney function? According to the National Kidney Foundation, 20 million people have chronic kidney disease, and 20 million more may be at risk and not even know it. Anyone with high blood pressure, diabetes, or family history of chronic kidney disease is at risk. Early diagnosis is vitally important. To get the whole story, talk to your doctor and visit the National Kidney Foundation at kidney.org or call for a free brochure. Because when it comes to chronic kidney disease, you might not know the half.
Once again, George Burke with the Inside Scoop, Virginia.
Welcome back. We're talking about blogs. We've been sort of dancing around newspapers and stuff. We got some people calling in with some more direct, specific questions. I have Kenton Engo of the New Dominion Project and Bryan Scrafford of Left of the Hill. During the break, we talked a little bit about corrections. I don't want to suggest that newspapers are great at it, but great newspapers are good at it. They make a mistake, they come back, and they put the correction. Even on their websites. I mean, I'll go back to research something, I'll pull down a Times story that's months old. They will have corrected the article if there was a mistake, and then at the bottom they note that this article was corrected because of this matter, et cetera, et cetera. We see it all the time in newspapers, and again, I don't want to suggest they correct things 100%. Rarely do I see a correction on any blog.
Because we're always right, George. We're always right.
And granted, I will buy the fact that they are, and if people agree that their opinions are great. But sometimes their opinions cloaked as news.
Well, hang on. I disagree with the premise that there are blogs that blogs in general don't correct themselves. If you read certain posts, there are update tacked at the end of the post, with timestamps and everything. And so it's good practice. It's believed to be good practice among bloggers that there are corrections. But the question is not whether the corrections exist, it's who does the corrections. And so what happens with blogs is that it takes the power of correcting the facts away from the gatekeeper, that would be the newspaper model, and sends it to the masses. And so when you have all these eyeballs looking over your work, combing over and trying to prove you wrong, that's the check. There are internal checks and balances within the masses. And so by taking away the power of gatekeeper, we open up information to the masses.
Except that I would suggest often like-minded blogs, for example, the Democratic political blogs in Virginia or the Republican political blogs in Virginia, and rarely does the twain meet, tend to be echo chambers. That one reports on the other, and the next reports on the other, and the next reports on what the other one said, and often one blog will quote something as fact by quoting what was said on another blog, but if you drill all the way down to the original article, there's no basis in fact for that, but they will continue to repeat it.
Reprinting an AP article? That's one guy sitting in the field writing one article that gets printed in 250 newspapers. That's one of the other problems with the newspapers.
I think
you can get these wire stories anywhere you want.
I think another big thing that you need to remember as you're going through the blogosphere, and this is one of the unfortunate things about the internet, because if you're not constantly reading the blogs, you don't realize this. But most bloggers realize that if you go to Kenton's site, you go to my site, you go to other sites like Walter J. Kiff down in Charlottesville, there are bloggers who are highly respected, who are going to only print stuff that they know to be fact or opinion based on what they know to be fact. And then there's other bloggers who are kind of the rumor mongers, and it's only when you get people starting to quote them and saying the rumors that they're putting out are fact, that's when you get in trouble. I think a lot of bloggers, and you might disagree, but I think a lot of bloggers will only take certain of their colleagues as promoting fact, and there's only certain sites that you go to and you can reasonably assume they're fact. I think there's other sites where there's rumors that you have to worry about the quality of those. And then if you see another blogger quoting the rumor mongers, that's when I think that person loses some credibility, and also I think that's when you get into real trouble about maybe you need a correction here. I think most of the time, like a lot of the mainstream journalists, we will get stories from various sources, but then we'll go do our fact checking and put it forward. So I think our correction rate of the more credible bloggers are about the same as the reporters.
How does someone know if you expect a certain level of credibility from a news organization? How does someone know how to rate a blog? And I want to go back to the Associated Press comment, having worked for them. A reporter in the field who reports on an event files it, but before, other than breaking news at an Oklahoma City or 9/11, where that stuff is thrown right onto the wire as bulletins, everything that is written still goes through a series of editors, and it goes through some filters before it is put out directly to the newsrooms. That's what is missing in certainly most blogs. I would suggest there are some that are larger that have sort of a news structure to them, including, to a degree, Politico and the Huffington Post, I believe. You don't have that filter, and so I'll go back to the issue that one blogger is feeding off another and picking up news. They're not all reaching out to the same news sources. I've seen it 100 times, and I'm looking at it from a Virginia perspective. Or the other thing is, I may happen to know what the fact is. Mm-hmm. Doesn't mean I'm saying anything, but I know what the fact is, and I watch how one person surmises something about that fact that may or may not be true, and then all of a sudden it's echoed down the pike.
Okay, first a credibility question. The reader's market will settle the credibility question, which blogs have more credibility than others on which matter, in the same way they settled it for newspapers and magazines. You know, you wouldn't read the National Enquirer for in-depth policy analysis of our foreign policy. And so the market will settle, again, which blogs have credibility on which issues. And instead of saying, well, this is a good newspaper, this is a good blog, they'll say, this is a good blog that covers this. This is a good blog that covers that. And so I have faith that eventually the process of sorting out who's got more credibility will be the same as...
is it there now?
As we sort out newspaper credibility. See,
is it there now? You said eventually. Is it there now?
Well, it's there for the newspapers, but this is a new medium. And it is there now.
I think it really, the credibility and the trustworthiness, I think, depends on who the reader is. George, if you're not a blogger, but when you go on to the blogs, you know which bloggers are out at events, which bloggers generally are actually taking the time to interview politicians and things like that. And so for people like yourself who are fairly knowledgeable about the process, are adept at building relationships with the bloggers and making sure you know what's going on.
I also know which ones I like and which ones I don't.
Yeah, hopefully I'm on the good list.
Same goes with newspapers.
But I think this is one of those things where for people like yourself, and I think the credibility issue has been solved. For people who, like, on a daily basis, I get hundreds of people that come to my site simply because they've Googled Jerry Connolly, and I've written a recent piece on Jerry Connolly. So for people like that, they don't necessarily know if my site is credible unless they've heard about me somewhere else. So in that circumstance, I don't think we've solved it. But I think for influencing the discussion among activists, I think it's relatively settled.
Let me throw one more thing out and preface it by the fact that both of you guys use your real names when you're out on your blogs and other people's blogs. But you've got people who have all sorts of funny names, etc. They might write serious stuff, but they may have some unusual anonymous name, or they're out there anonymously. Does that help in terms of the credibility?
I think it's the same thing where inside kind of the insiders group, most of us know or have a general idea of who these anonymous commenters are. And so...
I don't even mean just anonymous, because that option, you know, often people go to a blog, you have to go through all this rigmarole to put your name in. It's just easy to click anonymous and you get right out there and you can leave your comment. But a lot of people have monikers, you know, of sorts. They have names for themselves.
Right. Like, take for instance, there's one blog in Northern Virginia called Anonymous is a Woman. And now, people who aren't political insiders probably don't know who she is. But the three of us all know that that's Karen Duncan.
Of course, she runs a picture with the governor and her husband that I took on the front page of her website.
But see, we know who, so we all know who she is, and we know that we can take her opinion credibly. Whereas someone who just Googled something on Tim Kaine, her, and a photo you took, will see that photo but would have no idea.
So we're getting our tongues tied up on the question of whether or not there'll be anonymous commenters, but if the people who read this stuff don't believe that they have credibility, the question is moot.
They move on to another one.
They move on.
So it would be, I'm surprised we don't see reporters in the Washington Post call themselves like the Lone Ranger and things like that.
Quite surprisingly,
because they get paid to do this.
We have a lot of bloggers.
Some bloggers get paid. We'll get to that.
Not me.
We have some ways that we can track who's commenting on our site, who's reading. I know for a fact that I have had people comment anonymously on my website from the Washington Post newsroom, or at least that's where their server came from.
Mm-hmm.
And when I trace that comment back and try to figure out who had written the comment, it's fairly easy for me to figure out who it was, and then you can see that they're making these anonymous comments. And I think it's rather entertaining that when you see these anonymous comments all of a sudden go to the Washington Post website and their Virginia political blogs. And that's where I think we all realize what's going on, but the general public, especially those who just casually read the Washington Post, don't realize that's going on.
We have a couple of phone calls. We got 2 minutes, 48 seconds left in this thing. We got Amy from Springfield is on the phone. So let's put her through if we can.
Hi. Obviously, both of you are very involved in politics. I was wondering.
Can I ask you a question first? Are you a blogger?
I am.
That's what I thought.
I think we know.
Are you anonymous?
No.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was wondering specifically what got both of you involved with blogging.
I first got involved in blogging back in 2006. I wanted to support Andy Hurst, who was running for Congress in the 11th. And I thought one of the great ways that I could get involved was to put out a blog and write about the race there, because in my opinion, the Washington Post and other papers weren't paying enough attention to Andy. And Andy was a great candidate. He's a friend of mine, and I really wanted to promote his cause. And so I started blogging primarily in support of him. And then that moved on, that when I got more and more recognition and as I met more candidates, I had other people I wanted to support, and that's how I kind of took off, and now I cover a whole bunch of stuff.
A combination of anger and boredom after the 2004 elections, and eventually morphed what I have now.
Let's get to that issue, and that is blogger. Well, we're not going to have a lot of time. We'll have to do it in the next segment. But bloggers as advocates. Once you've read a blog for a little while, I mean, let's face it, many of these blogs really are single candidate blogs. My candidate is great, and the other two guys are skunks, or the other three guys are skunks, or the opponent's a skunk in a primary, usually, because it's a Democratic blog that Democratic people are reading. Is that adding to the debate?
I disagree with the assertion that we have single candidate blogs as the majority. I've got 4 people on my blog, and we all support different gubernatorial candidates. And so, and we look not only at the governor's races, but we have multiple other races. So it's just not one candidate thing.
Yeah, I'm going to have to disagree on that.
Yeah, we're going to take a break. I'm going to let him disagree with me when we get back. Maybe I'll cite a few examples. We'll see. But please hang in there with us. It's an interesting conversation with Kenton and Bryan Scrafford, 2 bloggers who've been around for a while. They may not look by years, but they've been playing this game for a while, and I'm glad to have them. Be right
back. This is firstgov.gov, where we're obsessed with getting you government information.
Brand new student loan applications on the site, baby. This calls for a celebration. Where's your uncle?
So in the end, it was either take the astronaut gig or come work here. What can I say? Duty called.
Dude, that's my cop.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure that's Sam's cup.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. No. Sam's. No.
Just log on or email us and get what you need.
C, change of address form. That's how it's done.
D, driver's license renewal.
E, emailing social security information.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Nice, we'll allow it. All right,
What are those? Government surplus cars for auction. You posted those online last time. No, you did.
I'm posting them online this time!
For all your government information, firstgov.gov.
Oh, what have we got here? Sometimes you feel tired. You can't seem to lose those extra pounds off your midsection. And your joints hurt when you take the stairs? Well, you're getting older. But I'm happy to say that there's some simple things we can do to keep you happy and healthy for years to come. We can also lower your risk for some serious diseases the older population is often subject to. Proper nutrition is more important than ever. Your body has changed, you know. Not as many treats. A basic exercise plan, lots of walks and fresh air, and most importantly, come and see me for twice-yearly checkups to help ensure the best possible quality of life. Now, how does that sound? Good boy.
Improve the quality of life for your elderly pet. Schedule twice-yearly checkups that include preventive care and regular lab work. A message from the veterinary members of the American Animal Hospital Association.
Once again, George Burke with the Inside Scoop, Virginia.
Welcome back to the generational war. Old newspaper man battles young bloggers. No, I'm kidding. My guests today are Kenton and Bryan Scrafford. Kenton runs a blog called the New Dominion Project, and Bryan Scrafford runs a blog called Left of the Hill. You wanted to talk about the blending of, first of all, there are a lot of newspapers and a lot of media outlets that don't get seats in the White House press room, and they complain about it all the time. Now there's at least one or two bloggers that have seats in the press room, I take it. Tell me about it.
If you were watching the presidential election at all, if you were interested in who was winning which state, you probably heard this guy named Nate Silver. He runs a blog called 538. And when we talk about this blogs versus newspapers debate, I think 538 is one of the best examples of the synthesis between a news-dominated coverage and an opinion-dominated coverage. 538 initially focused on statistical analysis of polls and other politically wonky things that appealed to people, because Nate Silver is what made his fortune in baseball sabermetrics, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
But what ended up happening was that he has both a blog style and credibility. And the reason is, number one, readers read his stuff and they believe he has credibility. So he has the same kind of credibility newspapers get. Readers read newspapers and they believe they have credibility. And number two, he's got resources and time. He's got a press pass. He's got the time to write. And number three, he does in-depth analysis of topics that are of no interest to most of the population, but are of great interest to his readers. And so that's the segmentation of the media market that will define the media market for time to come.
And I think it goes beyond simply the statistics that Nate puts on. You have bloggers that are also, they're credible enough that they're getting interviews with members of Congress, and then they can go out and put their personal kind of feelings and backgrounds on it as in the same time that they're keeping true to what the candidate or member of Congress did. I recently, after Obama had his non-State of the Union address, I spoke with Jerry Connolly, was able to kind of give it a personal account of how he reacted. And I think that's another thing that members of Congress and current candidates are realizing, that you can reach out to bloggers and you can have your facts put forward, but that personal touch that a blogger will put on it instead of a mainstream reporter can actually attract different types of readers. And I think that's one of the big ways that you're combining the newspaper credibility of having a factual interview and combine it with the kind of the personal touch that the blogs can give.
Let's take it one more step. If a newspaper, I can't buy a Washington Post reporter a cup of coffee.
Right.
That's their rules, and that's the way it is with most newspapers. But I can buy a blogger. Lots of candidates have.
You can try.
Lots of
you can't buy them all.
have. I'm not casting this aspersion at either of you guys. And I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but there's been a great debate out there. I mean, lots of people have come on and finally, only after being questioned, admitted they're getting paid, but that should not make a difference because I'm, putting my opinion forth. So, because you're paying me to put my opinion forth about you, it's okay.
Right now,
is that credible?
I think it's a very. First of all, we have to define what we're talking about. There are bloggers that have taken paid staff positions or have been offered paid staff positions for campaigns. Most of the honest bloggers who do that will immediately admit it. They'll usually put up a little disclaimer whenever they're writing about whoever they're being paid about, saying so-and-so is paying me, yada, yada, yada. That, in my opinion, most of the time takes care of the credibility.
So they're a flack. Once you're paid, you're no longer
you're
a blogger, you're no longer a citizen journalist, and I'm not sure I'd use that word. You're a flack. You're like a publicist. You're a paid guy who's paid to promote that particular candidate. Otherwise, why would a candidate pay him? Because
here's the credibility market that I keep talking about, which is the minute that somebody who's been concealing the fact that they've been getting paid, and it's hard to do with finance reports and things like that, the minute that comes out, their credibility is shot. It falls like a rock in water. And so the market of readers decides, okay, this guy is no longer credible.
But if they're getting paid, are they not a flack?
More or less, yes, you're never going, okay, basically the answer to that is yes, but I'd like to kind of explain that a little bit. You're not going to see a negative post out of someone that's getting paid by a candidate. You're not going to
see a negative post out of a flack about the person he works for either.
But what you're going to see is instead of having their posts go out and be they're debating like so-and-so's policies online, what you're going to see is you're going to influencing their campaign from the inside. Say someone is extremely interested in, I work in the economic justice area, and if I were to actually go out and start working for a candidate and I saw, oh my gosh, this guy's against the Employee Free Choice Act, I'm going to sure as heck make sure that he turns his policy around.
Do you really think a blogger can convince a gubernatorial candidate or a presidential candidate singularly to change their position on an issue? I doubt it.
More so than an average citizen who doesn't have a blog. And so this is what the blogs do.
And also,
but if you're working for him, you're going to be espousing his party line. You're not getting paid as a policy person. You're getting paid to promote that person on the blogs. There's lots of them out there doing it. And I'm not, just let's call them what they are. They're flacks, they're publicists, they're public relations people, they're press secretaries. That's not a citizen journalist.
Flacks will have as much credibility as your readers give them, and as we have demonstrated, people don't give the same kind of credibility to flacks as they do to people who aren't paid. And so I think the question is unimportant. There will always be flacks. There will always be PR hacks. There will always be people.
I'm one of them.
Exactly. There will always be people who are running around paid to promote their candidate, but they will always have less credibility because the readers believe they have less credibility, and that will not change. That has not changed in the newspaper industry. That will not change now.
There are instances where bloggers don't reveal that until they're caught. Like
right, and
does that hurt the credibility of blogs in general? Because bloggers rarely are bloggers viewed as being objective. Bloggers are always viewed as being on one side or the other, unless they're talking about kitty cats or vegetation or cameras or something like that. But even bloggers who push photography, I've read, are often paid by a particular company to promote those products. That's what they do.
Right, and I think it's plain and simple. If someone is going to publicly disclaim from the beginning that they are being paid by a certain candidate, I don't think that diminishes their value. If someone were...
But what are they doing? They're pushing a company line.
Right, and I think people understand that, but they understand that and their credibility is not ruined, but people do view it as, okay, that person is being paid. But I think when you do ruin your credibility is when you make a big stink about how you're just a grassroots activist supporting somebody, and then all of a sudden it turns out you're getting paid. That's when it gets really controversial.
We only got a couple of minutes. Let me steer it just a slight left or right turn, and then I want to give both of you guys a couple of minutes to talk. There are big companies out there like New Media Strategies, et cetera, that are aimed, their whole goal is to influence blogs to a great degree. They push a product, they push a movie, they push, I don't think they push many politicians, but they push things, and they don't necessarily push them out to political blogs. They push them out to blogs that deal with those particular subject matters, and they throw out informed blogs by people who are paid. They throw stuff onto blog sites. So you don't control what is said on your blog once you've made a posting. Most bloggers don't. Some eliminate comments and the like. So how do you stop those folks from hijacking your blog?
But here's the fundamental question, which is, are you going to have one newspaper, one source telling you this is the way things are, these are the facts as we, the unbiased observers, just trust us, believe it to be, or will you have many voices telling you this is what we believe to be the facts, you decide which are all the facts? And so I think that's the model which we're going toward. And so this question of what, this hand-wringing over paid flacks and corrupt bloggers and things like that is irrelevant, because there are so many sources, that instead of one person telling you this is right, and if they get it wrong, God help us, you can decide between the multiple sources and choose which one is most credible.
Some people suggest it's a cacophony of voices that results in a Tower of Babel.
Well, and I think this is where a lot of people have certain blogs that they primarily read, and they have certain blogs that they go to for certain information. I've recently become kind of known as a person that will go and film events, and that way people can come, they get the direct source information, and then they can read what I have to say about what's on the video. And I think that has helped, and at least in my experience, it was email feedback that I've gotten. People value that more. And what I think when other blogs are constantly linking to material but never coming up with their own primary source material, I think those blogs eventually fade off. Yes, they're going to be around, yes, they'll slightly influence the discussion, but it's only the blogs that are consistently putting forward some primary source material mixed in with their opinions and their linking to other informative articles.
Kenton, you got 20 seconds. Sound up.
Here's the future of in-depth reporting. Instead of one person, one computer, one newspaper doing it, you're going to have a cloud of people who will be doing these in-depth kind of reporting. And so for number crunching stories, for instance, you'll get depth that can't be provided by just one person, but by multiple people. And that is the power of blogs.
All right, we've heard it. I appreciate you guys being on. I gave you a bit of a hard time. I was playing the devil's advocate, and I enjoyed it. We could probably spend 3 or 4 hours talking on this subject. And the reality of the matter is I would agree with you. I think that the internet is ultimately going to replace newspapers. I worry if we're going to have the same broad coverage, but we shall see. Somehow things always seem to work out. Thanks for watching. We'll be here next week. Good night.